So now the redo package is on Hackage and should be Cabal installable for anyone who wants to use it. Welcome back to episode 12 of Haskell from Scratch. We spent the last 2 episodes testing our implementation of redo in a real-world scenario. And it's time to move on and handle some things that I've been putting off until now, namely the documentation and checking the performance of the program. But before we do that, we're going to have an easier time if we make a Cabal file for our package, because some of the tools for documentation and profiling depend on having a Cabal file. And while we're at it, we can go ahead and upload our package to Hackage so that people can have an easier time installing it. And if a distribution packager wants to include it in a distribution, it should be a little bit easier. So let's start by running Cabal and Net, which helps us build the skeleton of the Cabal file. So our package name is going to be redo, because I know that there are no existing packages in Hackage with that name. And for the version number, I'm going to go with semantic versioning with 3 digits. And since I don't feel that it's ready to be called a 1.0 release, since it hasn't received enough testing, and since calling it 0.0 is kind of nonsensical, we'll call it 0.1.0 and take the convention that odd number minor releases are development releases. Next, as far as a license goes, I'm going to stick with the spirit of what DJB has released his other packages in and release this into the public domain. Give my name as the author here and my email. And for the homepage URL, since I don't really have anything else, let's use the GitHub page for it. And the synopsis is it's a build system, make replacement, implementation of redo. For the project category, we have a couple options: development, distribution, maybe even system. So I took a look on the packages list on Hackage under distribution, and Cabal and some other build tools are in there, so I'm going to stick to that for now. So distribution, this is an executable, and we don't need the documentation on what each field means. We'll just have to go through and delete that if we do. And we have a warning here that this is an unknown license type. We need to specify a copy of the license ourselves. So let's do that right now. I hereby place the source code for redo into the public domain. And then we'll open the redo.cabal file that was generated for us. Here at the top we have a link to the Cabal User's Guide. The name of our package, the version, the synopsis. I'll add a description a little bit later. We've given up copyright on this. And here in the executable section, we need to specify the file that contains our main function, and that's going to be redo.hs. There aren't any other modules right now. And then we have a list of dependencies here. And base is basically what comes with GHC. It's the very basic libraries that change each time the GHC compiler gets updated. And generally, there aren't backwards incompatible changes between minor versions. So I'm just going to say that we need base 4 or greater. There's not really a good way to test if this is working on all versions of base 4. So let's save this. And the nice thing about having a Cabal file is that we can now use Cabal Dev to test that everything is specified correctly for our package. So the first thing that Cabal Dev tells us is that we aren't explicitly depending on process. So let's do that. And I took a look at process. It starts at version 1.0. It hasn't gone through any major changes, and as far as I know, the API hasn't changed, so I'm not going to specify a version number here. Let's see what else we're missing. File path is the same. And then we have directory. That's the same. These are all pretty basic libraries. Now, containers with datamap.lazy is different. Data.map.lazy was introduced, or at least the module, the implementation was moved into that module in version 0.5. So we want at least version 0.5 for that. And then we need pure MD5. And I looked at this as well. There were some changes in the recommended interface, but the MD5 function and the MD5 digest or context has remained the same. So now we have this error, could not resolve dependencies trying redo 0.1.0, which is a little bit cryptic and confusing. And I introduced this one intentionally just to show you that Cabal Dev is sort of a wrapper around Cabal or Cabal install, and sometimes it masks the error messages for you. So if we just did Cabal configure, we should find out what's wrong here. And that's because I uppercased the P in pure MD5. So now when we switch back to Cabal install, we see that byte string is missing. Similarly with byte string, the interface hasn't really changed. And now we have an error message in, it looks like a syntax error in the source, which is really confusing because we know we've compiled redo just fine up to this point. And it's saying that on line 57, which we don't have any warnings about from FlyMake, there's an error with this conditional. And what's happening here is that there is a language extension, do and if then else, which allows us to not indent then and else in an if then else statement in a monadic do block. And the reason that we didn't get an error up until this point is that when you invoke JHC from the command line, it automatically enables some of these extensions if it sees that the source file expects them. So what we could do is go into the Cabal file and add an extensions field. Let's see. Extensions, and say do and if then else. Try compiling again. And now that works. But it seems kind of silly to depend on an extension for just this. So I'm going to just increase the indentation here on this if block. And it looks like there's one other place in the code where we'll need to increase the indentation as well. So you might also remember that we're using another extension here, scoped type variables. And we could move this out of this comment into the Cabal file here. But the benefit of having this in this file is that when we run hlint on it, it won't complain about it. You see, if we take this out here, when FlyMake runs, it complains about this again. So I think the best thing to do is just have it in both places so the Cabal file knows that the compiler needs to support this extension, and also when FlyMake runs, it knows not to complain about this either. Now we are running FlyMake, but we should go ahead and enable some GHC options here to turn on warn all, and from earlier we said don't warn missing signatures. That was from the episode where we introduced FlyMake. So now let's make sure that we do have this warning about a defined but not used trace shown. We'll leave that in for now. Actually, let's just comment it out while we're at it. Don't need this, and don't need this. So now we should have a clean build. Now I'm going to add a few more fields to the Cabal file which I think are useful, and I'll be back with you in a moment. Okay, we're back. So what I've added here is a description, a bug reports, which just links to the GitHub issues tracker. I've noted which version of GHC I've tested this with, and then added a source repository link linking directly to the Git source for this. So we should be done with the Cabal file for now. And running Cabal install like this installs it to the Cabal Dev directory in bin. And in order to force ourselves to maintain the Cabal file properly, instead of building directly with GHC in the redo file, I'm going to switch to building with Cabal Dev. So we'll Cabal Dev install. We need to depend on the Cabal file in case we change any options. And Cabal Dev also has a v0 option so that we don't get extra output. But it doesn't, as far as I know, have an option to specify the output file, so we can't output to the temporary file. But we could hack around that a little bit by moving Cabal Dev bin redo into the temporary file, getting rid of this line. There is one caveat with this though, and that is what happens when this Cabal Dev step fails. So we'll look at the good case here. We'll do redo. And we get the same type of output as before. And if we look at the redo binary and the current time, you can see that it's been updated correctly. But what happens when there's an error in the file, like a syntax error, and we try to redo? Well, in this case, it worked, but only because the move failed, because our script didn't check. Our redo script didn't check to see if this Cabal Dev install succeeded by testing, the exit code of that program. And rather than relying on each individual redo script to do that, I think we're going to be safer specifying the -e option when we invoke the shell so that it automatically exits on errors from any line in the script, so that we don't end up trying to move 0-byte files or anything like that. So let's compile that and install it. And then see what the result is if we introduce an error here again. So redo. And now instead of a failure here in a move command, it catches the error a little bit earlier on and prevents installation. So we have a working Cabal file at this point. What about uploading it to Hackage? And the first step in uploading to Hackage is getting yourself a user account. It's not an automatic process. You need to send an email to Ross Patterson here. So if you need to upload something, that's where you go to do it. I've already created an account because I have another package up on Hackage. So I would go to upload, and the page tells us that the package needs to be in the form produced by Cabal's sdist command, which can also be done from Cabal Dev. And there's a form here to check and upload the package. So let's go ahead and run Cabal Dev sdist. And it puts the file into the dist directory with the version number. And let's look at the contents. So it includes the redo.hs license file, a minimal setup file, and the Cabal file here, which should be sufficient to build redo. So let's switch back to the browser and run a check on the package to make sure that it's correct. So we'll go into project, redo dist, and then our sdist package, and check that. And we've been foiled by this requirement that everything needs an upper bounds on base, which is probably why it's so prevalent. So we're going to have to switch that. So we'll go back in, edit the Cabal file, say base less than 5, rebuild the sdist, go back into the browser, and then try this one more time. And the page gives us a preview of what our package will look like on Hackage. Lists our dependencies, some information, and there's no documentation for our package, so that part is empty here. So it looks fine to me. Let's go ahead and upload it. And I'll enter my username. And password. And no, I do not want to remember the password. So it looks like the upload was successful. To test that, let's go to Packages, Redo. And I don't see anything there, so let's go back to the main page. And it probably takes a little while to process. So we can search the packages for redo, which is just a Google search, which is definitely not going to be up to date. So let's try just searching the page. And there it is, redo. And I probably had the URL wrong, packages was plural. So now the redo package is on Hackage and should be Cabal installable for anyone who wants to use it. Now there are a couple changes that I want to make to redo already. For one, Mitchell Rosen suggested something that I had missed, and he said that when a redo script exits with an error code, as you see here, redo itself should exit with an error code, and I think it makes sense to exit with the same error code. So here on line 61 or 60, where we get this error, we should be exiting with a failure code here. So we'll say exit with exit failure and the code here. We'll just pass along the same code for now. And we have a fly make error that we didn't import system exit with. But before we go further, I'm going to roll this back because I want to start breaking things into individual commits a little bit better. So I'm going to first commit these changes with our new Cabal file and license. So let's add the license, add the setup. Whoops, I just ignored those. So let's try that again here. So we're going to stage those two, ignore the Cabal Dev, the whole directory here. Let's go ahead and ignore the dist directory while we're at it. We'll also add redo.cabal, and then we'll stage these changes here as well. So we'll commit this as cabalizing redo 0.1.0 first public development release. Okay, so with that committed, now it's time to exit with exit failure code and then add exit with to the imports. And so now notice that this redo invocation up here, when you look at my bash prompt, it has this green check mark saying that everything ran successfully. Let's install the new version, and then we'll introduce an error here, and then try this again, and it's going to say that it exited with an exit code, and it passes the exit code back to the shell. So there's one other change I'd like to make before releasing another version, and that is that this Hackage directory output I added earlier is really bugging me. I didn't want to make a major change to refactor a lot of code. I just wanted to get this message working correctly. So the directory here is a bit ugly, so I'm just going to leave a note, the directory argument, and then fix up this statement so that we say if the directory is the current directory, then we don't print anything. Otherwise, we print the directory and then the target And we'll just wrap this here to make it a little bit easier to read and understand. So let's rebuild this. Redo install. And now the messages should look a little bit better. Let's do redo clean here, and then redo all. Yeah, a little bit nicer. Still not exactly the perfect output that I want, but I think it'll do for releasing a, let's say, stable beta release. So between this and the other change, which I already committed, clean up progress output, there's now 2 commits since the redo 0.1, so let's bump the version number to 0.2.0, saying this is a stable, although not a 1.0 release. So we'll bump version number. And then now we can go back into redo Cabal Dev sdist again. We end up with a new version number for the redo package, which we need because you can't upload to Hackage the same package with the same version number twice. So it really pays to check your package before uploading it. So we'll go in and upload this new one. I'm going to check it again just to make sure everything's okay. Looks good. You can see that it's updating the version here. So we'll go back and upload this one. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode and seen that it's not very complicated to get your package up onto Hackage, especially with Cabal being pretty good at catching any errors in it beforehand. I normally wouldn't upload an executable to Hackage. I've uploaded libraries in the past, but I think Redo is a bit of an exception because it's a development tool, so it's not exactly a library, but it's something that's useful to have for developing packages, so I think it fits in pretty well. And now that our package has a Cabal file, it's going to be a lot easier to add Haddock documentation to it, which is basically the Haskell equivalent of JavaDoc or any of those other inline sort of documentation systems. So we'll take a look at that in the next episode. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you then.